Right, welcome to a screencast to accompany part 3 of the first tutorial in integrated mobile applications. We're going to split the tutorial into 3 parts, and I'm going to try and give you a brief overview and set the scene, if you like, give you some way to think about the features of different problems and how they map onto the choices you might make about choosing a mobile development solution. So be that the mobile web, which might just be running a browser on your phone, through to the kinds of applications I'm going to discuss here, so application container solutions, through to full native applications where you code for the very specific device. Then I think we're going to have a look at a system called Apex, which is, I guess, towards the left-hand end of that line, sort of mobile web applications. In part 3, I'm going to take you through a tool called PhoneGap, which sits very firmly in the application container context. So this is the idea that we might want to build our application against a particular framework that will then deal with binding our application onto the different devices. So we write our application once, and then we compile it for different devices. So we might write a HTML application and then wrap it in a Android application, or wrap it in an iPhone application, or a BlackBerry application. Those are the kind of tools that I'd like to talk to you about, and the focus of this screencast. In order to do that, we're going to need a few tools. The image you've got on the USB memory stick, the VMware image, is a Linux Ubuntu system, and the reason we're using that is, although we're about building phone applications need to get their data from somewhere, particularly the problem that we're going to be looking at over this course. You therefore might need a full protocol stack of components, so some RESTful web services, for example, that are going to supply data to this application and provide you with endpoints when you wish to communicate back to a central service. Because obviously if you're creating an application that's coordinating lots of different people, you need to have some kind of hub-esque thing in the middle where you can coordinate all those details. So Linux makes it very easy for us to give you that full protocol stack. Pardon me. So the first part of the tutorial notes really are a bit of a tour de force of Linux and the commands you might need and the interface, just to get you in the mood for things. We're going to do quite a lot with the terminal and with the command line. Here are some useful commands that I'm going to be using throughout this presentation. You can play with those as you like. We're also going to need to orchestrate 2 other services. We're going to use GitHub as a means of managing our code. More specifically, the way that PhoneGap likes to consume code is by taking it out of GitHub. So in some ways we're going to treat GitHub a little bit like a Dropbox. We're going to drop code into GitHub, and then PhoneGap is going to pick it up and build it for us. So we're kind of using it as a means of sharing code with, in this case, a service, which is going to be PhoneGap. Of course, we're going to use PhoneGap itself, and we'll come to that later on. What I'm going to give you now is a reusable procedure that you could adapt to any project you wanted to build a container-based application using, particularly PhoneGap. So if you want to create a bin collection application, you could follow this procedure to create that empty shell of an application. What we're going to do is we're going to stick some hello world text in our empty shell of an application in this tutorial, just so you can do the end-to-end process if you like. In order to do that, you're going to need a GitHub account first and foremost. So get yourself over to github.com, and if you don't have an account, sign yourself up for one. Students quite often use their student IDs as GitHub usernames. It just means you don't forget it. Write it down, because you will need it throughout the rest of the course. Obviously, I've already got a GitHub ID. Here's my GitHub homepage. And what you're going to do, once you've logged in, once you've created your application and logged in, click on New Repository, and we're going to call our repository IMA Hello World, and we'll give it a description. We want it to be public. That's very important because we're using the free PhoneGap service, which will only talk to public repositories. We'd like it initialized with a README, but no gitignore file. And then I click on Create Repository. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating an empty repository. Think of it as an empty Dropbox folder where I'm going to stick my source code. Here's my project. You can see GitHub has given me a very nice cool URL for my project. That's my username, ACESII, and that's my project name. So it's pretty easy to guess what project URLs are in GitHub. You can see that the project's got a blank README, and this is the content of the README right now. It just says IMA Hello World. Obviously, this project currently only exists on GitHub, and we need it on our local disk so that we can make changes to it and improve it. This line here is GitHub giving you different ways to copy the code to your local system, and you can see it says read and write access. And our choices are HTTP, SSH, which is the default I think, and Git read only. Well, we certainly want to be able to change our project. SSH is actually the most convenient, and if you have experience with Linux and Git, you might want to set yourself up a public key using SSH keygen. For simplicity, I'm going to go with HTTP here. If you're comfortable with SSH, then feel free to use that instead. But for now, let's do it this way. So I click on HTTP and then I highlight this text, edit, copy. You can use Control-C here, but Control-C has some different meanings in some of the tools we're going to be looking at, and some of them it's quite dangerous. So until you're absolutely clear what's going on in this environment, I suggest you go for edit copy instead, just to be on the safe side. So we need the terminal now, so I'm going to click on this terminal icon over on the left, and you can see here pops up my terminal window. I can type in pwd, print working directory, /home/student, and I can type cd. Oh, sorry, let's do ls first. List ls is like a dir in Windows. It lists the current files in the working directory. You'll notice that one of the directories here is something called public HTML. Public HTML is a convenient way for users in a Linux system or a Unix system to publish their files on the local web server. So anything I put in that directory is going to be visible. And if I cd into public HTML and type ls, you'll see that all there is in there is a file called thisispublic.html. If I in my browser window, I go to localhost/student/, you can see that's the same file. This is public. Don't mistake this for a kind of Windows file explorer. This is absolutely publishing your file on the local web server. Of course, because it's localhost, it's not really visible to other machines or to other users, but it's a very convenient way of us publishing files to ourselves. If we want to have some API endpoints, this might be a nice way of doing that as well. So this is just a very easy way to publish files on the local web server without having to copy them around. And it's an old convention. So the convention is the tilde and then the username concerned. So tilde student in this case is the student user. I had just copied my GitHub project URL. What I'm going to do is I cd into this public HTML directory, and then I'm going to use the git command, which talks to things like the git repository, and I say git space clone, edit, paste. So that's the URL that I copied from GitHub. What's happening here is Git is fetching all the source code, which of course there isn't any, it's an empty repository at the moment, to my local disk, and you can see that an IMA Hello World directory has appeared, and all it's got in it is the README file. Now, PhoneGap also provides a starter application, an empty starter application, and I think there it is. I'll just copy that. Oh no, I've copied the wrong one. I do apologise. Here we are. So PhoneGap provides you with an empty starter application, and they suggest that you use this fork mechanism. You can see this project has been forked 3,392 times. I am not sure that that's going to serve you particularly well as a means of doing this, so I suggest you do it the way that I'm going to show you instead. I think you'll find in the long run it causes you a little bit less pain. We're still in the public HTML directory, and you can see here's my IMA Hello World project that I've cloned. I'm going to do exactly the same here. I'm going to copy the Git URL of the PhoneGap starter project. So this is a different project. I go Edit, Copy, Git clone, Edit, Paste. You can see Git does its work. And I type ls. You can see I now have a PhoneGap start project as well. If I do an ls PhoneGap start, you can see it's got a license file, a readme file, an updating file, and a www directory. If I list the www directory, you'll see that it's got a file called config.xml, an icon, an index.html, JavaScript directory, and some other useful tools. CSS folder as well, of course. This is the actual starter project in this www directory. What we need to do is we need to copy the important parts of this starter application into our own application. If we'd cloned the project, this would be done for us, but it would also do it would have some other more unpleasant side effects. So as I say, I suggest you follow this method instead. What we're going to do is we're going to use the Unix copy command. We say cp -R, which means recursively, and then we give it the source folder. So here we want PhoneGap start /www, and then we give it the target folder, which is IMA Hello World. So what we're doing is we're going to, this -R recursive flag means go into the www directory and copy any files and any folders and any children of those folders and any children of those children. So the whole tree will be copied into our application. And that's done really quickly. If I do an ls of IMA Hello World now, you'll see it also has this www directory with the same contents. Now, what I need to do is, if I type git status, if I go into the IMA Hello World directory and type git status, it comes back and tells me that I've got an untracked file called www, and what that means is that Git isn't tracking anything that is in that directory at the moment, and we need to tell Git about it because it's important. It's our source code for our application. I've also suggested you run these other git commands. You only need to do this the first time, but whenever you run a git command, your username is stamped against it so that people can see who did what. Basically, it gives an audit log for the code. If you don't set these, Git will annoy the heck out of you every time you try and push code up. So if you just take the time now to run these commands, and I suggest you use a real email address and your real name, then it's going to just save you some irritating messages as we go on. This is the part that does the real work. So cd IMA Hello World. Well, I think I already did that. You can see I'm already in the directory IMA Hello World. I should have said at the start, by the way, this video you can play on high res on HD on YouTube. So if you're having trouble reading the text, I am sorry, I should have said at the start. Stick it onto HD and you should fare much better. What I need to do is I need to ask Git to start and track this www directory. So I say git space add space www. Now I type git status. It tells me about all these new files which it's tracking. So it's recursively gone into the directory and started adding them. And you can see we've got lots of different files. I'm going to say git commit. So Git's tracking the files, but now I want to fix it. I always want to be able to get back to this pristine state, this pristine application. And I say -A for all files, -M, which is here comes a message, and the message I'm going to give this commit is added www directory. And I can say git push. And what that's going to do is push my changes back up to GitHub. It prompts me for my login. And I can't type my password. That's better. So let's just very quickly pop over to the project. So this is my project. If I refresh this now, you'll see that the www folder has appeared, and here are all the files that I've added, including my index.html, which is the most important one in this case. If I click on commits, you'll see here's the message I typed in my commit message, added www directory. So this is how the audit log works with GitHub. So there's some more details here, and as I said, this is pretty much a reusable procedure. If you want to set up your own application, you'd do everything the same, except you wouldn't call it IMA Hello World. You'd call it My Super App or My Uber App, as I've suggested there. Now, we're working in this public HTML directory. What's the point of that? If I refresh this now, you'll see that these two directories have appeared, IMA Hello World and PhoneGap Start. Well, we don't really need PhoneGap Start anymore. We might leave it there because it's useful to copy if we want to create new projects. More interestingly, IMA Hello World. And here's the www folder. I'm going to click on that. Now, what we've got is, when we've gone into the www folder, the web browser has seen that there's an index.html file and it's presented that page to us. You'll notice there's an icon, and then immediately right to the right of that it says PhoneGap connecting to device. PhoneGap is a system that uses HTML to let you build applications, and what we're going to do is we're going to sneakily make the HTML pages look like real phone applications. This obviously doesn't look much like a phone application right now, and it's running in a browser, not a phone. Up on the right here you'll see this icon, which is a Chrome plugin called Ripple. Click on that, and I'm going to click on the enable link. Now the first time you do that, you'll be asked what kind of a device Ripple should emulate, and you should click on the PhoneGap 10 option. Click on it again to get rid of the dialog. What you'll see now is the same URL, but I'm presented with my application now in a phone kind of window, and on either side I've got lots of settings that let me basically pretend to be a phone. So I can do things like set the latitude and longitude of the phone, or I can set the network connection status of the phone. In the phone window itself you'll see that now the icon is on top of the text, and this is interesting. So all solutions, be they the mobile web, through to these container applications, through to native applications, need to worry about how things are laid out, and this is usually referred to as a fluid layout. So you saw that when the screen was wider these were side by side, but as the screen has narrowed they've stacked on top of each other. So this is a fluid layout, and the layout is dynamically changing itself to cater for the kind of device. Obviously if we were looking at this on an iPad, or if we were to turn the phone around, I think actually I've never done this before, so it should be interesting. Can I click on the... Oh yeah, there we go. So I changed the orientation, and you can see the icon is now side by side. Put the orientation back, and you can see that. So this is like turning a phone around. This is Ripple. Rather than having to install an iOS emulator, and rather than having to install an Android emulator and a BlackBerry emulator, Ripple is basically pretending to be the PhoneGap API underneath your application, and it gives us one major advantage, which I will talk about in a little while. Being able to set things like latitude and longitude and Ethernet connection status are really important. If you've got geospatial aspects of your application, you might actually want to make the phone think it's somewhere else so that you can exercise some particular feature. Most of the app stores, one of the major tests they do is that your application behaves when the network connection is taken away. So you can use this to just switch off the network connection, or to emulate lag in the network, and that's what will happen when you try and get your app deployed on an app store. the Apple people or the Android people are going to run tests on it, make sure it behaves properly even when there's no network connection. So these options let you exercise your application in that way. So this is quite a useful little tool, really. And you can see this is how our app would look if it were running on a phone. So, obviously, this is the app, this is the default starter app, right? We haven't really done any work yet. I'm still in my IMA Hello World directory here. If I just type pwd, you'll see it's home student public HTML IMA Hello World. Just a quick reminder, if you want to get back here, cd change directory on its own will take you back to your home directory. From there I can say cd public HTML cd IMA Hello World. I'm using the tab key to autocomplete, so if I were to say cdw and then hit the tab key, it would autocomplete whatever names are in the current directory. That's saves my fingers. gedit is the Ubuntu default text editor. It's a little bit like WordPad. It's going to suit our purposes here. gedit.www/index.html. And then I'm going to put an ampersand character at the end. This asks Linux to run processes in the background, and the reason that I'm doing that is if I hadn't put that there I wouldn't be able to type commands in now, but because it is running in the background I can continue to type commands like ls, cd, etc. This editor window's popped up. The first time you start the editor it won't look like this. I've customized mine a little bit. When you start yours up it will look more like this. So I think it's quite useful if you hit view side panel, that'll give you this side panel. By default when it starts up you get a list of documents. If you click on the little file icon there you get a directory view instead, and this is handy because these are all the artifacts that make up your mobile application in PhoneGap. So you've got everything you need in front of you, and particularly we're looking at index.html here, but in coming weeks we're going to have to start and add JavaScript libraries and CSS and icons, so it's quite nice to be able to navigate around your project. And what you've got here is a very lightweight, cheap IDE in essence. We've got some syntax highlighting installed. What I'm going to do is, in this h1 tag, it says PhoneGap. Actually, while I'm here, I'll just show you this. You can see that underneath it, we've got a div ID is device ready, and then a paragraph with class event listening, connecting to device, class event received, device is ready. You'll see that this says device is ready, so there's no connecting to device shown there. If I just grab a incognito window and I go to localhost student IMA Hello World, if I went back here you can see this says connecting to device. What's going on here is when this page first is shown, the styles for event listening are to show it, and event received are to hide this paragraph. Then app.initialize runs, and if it's able to talk to the phone where this application should be running, there's an event which will cause this paragraph text to be hidden and this paragraph text to be displayed. Because when we open the application just in a browser window there is no phone, it stays with connecting to device. Whereas when we run it in this emulated environment we now get this message that says device is ready. So that's why there's a slight difference there, and it just shows you that the emulator's doing exactly what we want it to. Back to what we're doing. So it says PhoneGap. Now I'm going to change that. I'm going to say welcome to IMA tutorial 1, and I save that. Now this is the really cool thing. I hit reload in the phone. Welcome to IMA tutorial 1. You'll be used to that if you've done web application development. The build, deploy, test cycle for mobile applications is usually much more painful than this. You have to build the app, you have to install it on an emulated device, that can take minutes just to find out you made a silly mistake. Using PhoneGap and this particular tool called Ripple, I basically get very much the speed of kind of HTML development, which is incredibly powerful. for anybody who's ever had to do any mobile development, that build, deploy, test cycle it can become quite lengthy, especially with complicated applications. Here it's almost just like changing a HTML page and then reloading the browser. I think this is really quite powerful, and it's certainly different to most mobile application development environments. So I've made a change. We have customized this application. Back in my console, where I can still type commands because I use the ampersand at the end of the edit command, I type git status. And git comes back and tells me that www.index.html was modified. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to make that change permanent and push it up to GitHub. Remember, we're using GitHub as a kind of Dropbox. It's our way of sharing code with other things. Git commit -a -m changed index.html added IMA message. That's committed, and then I type git space push. Git prompts me for my username. Cool. So what we've done is we've made a change and then we've made it permanent and shared it with the world. In essence, we've shared our change. Here's the tutorial text. That's me doing the commit and the push. Now, this is all well and good, isn't it? But let's face it, it's running in a browser. You'd probably like to see this in your own device. This is where the second tool comes in, and if you go to build.phonegap.com, and I'll just log myself out, click on sign in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this sign in with GitHub account. So you've already signed up for a GitHub account, obviously. That's how we're managing our source code. We can sign in with GitHub. Now, because I've signed in previously, it's just taken me straight in. You will have to authorize PhoneGap build to access your GitHub credentials. Just allow it, and then you'll come straight through to here. And this is how we use PhoneGap build. Now, the free version of this, you can only build open source projects. So we click on the open source tag. Just like when we cloned our source code for the first time, this is like the Dropbox folder name or something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this URL again, this HTTPS URL for my project. I'm going to do edit copy. I go back to PhoneGap build and I paste that into there, and it says fetching repo. So we wait patiently for a moment, and then it comes back, and we've got a page. It says hello world. Okay, yeah, doesn't really tell us anything interesting. It's given us an app ID and a version number, PhoneGap version. We've got some options to enable debugging and enable hydration. We'll talk about that in a few weeks' time. Most importantly, this button says ready to build. Now, all we've done is to edit some text in a HTML page, right? So I click on the ready to build link, and I think this is one of the most exciting things about PhoneGap. What you see here are all the different devices. So we've got iOS, which is red, and I'll explain why. We've got Android here, we've got Windows phones, and this one, I don't know what that is. HP. So we've got a HP specific application here, and this is Symbian. I wish I knew which one that was. I don't know. The reason the iOS one is red is in order to build an iPhone app, you need a developer ID from Apple, and mine hasn't come through yet. So as soon as it does, we will put it in here, and then we'll be able to deploy this on some Apple devices on Monday. What I'll do on Monday as well. The whole point of this really is once the build has gone blue, and you can see the builds are finished. If you have a QR code reader, you can snap this QR code in your phone and it will download and install the app. Now, you may need to make a switch on your phone to allow installed applications, because most phones only like to install apps from app stores, obviously. So if you make that setting and then open this in using a QR code reader, it'll take you straight to an app download where you can install it, and then you can run it. And admittedly, all you'll see when you run this app is the hello from IMA message, but at least you'll have got an app on your phone. And that's the thing, that once it's polished and finished, you can upload to the App Store and you can sell if you wish to do so. So we've actually built an application that can be deployed on a phone through an App Store, and we've got this quite tight development loop. If you reach this point after an hour in the tutorial, and I certainly plan to be around until the end of the tutorial, we can start and look at more interesting things we can do with this. We've got the end-to-end process now. Obviously, the next thing to do is to get rid of this thing, which still actually looks a little bit like a web page. We're going to be using something called jQuery Mobile, which gives us widgets that, although they're buttons on web pages, they actually look like real mobile apps. And if you go to the PhoneGap site, there's a gallery of applications, and some of them it's very hard to tell the native applications from the application container applications. So by all means, start and have a look at jQuery Mobile, and play around with this a little bit. You can change the text. You could maybe stick some other HTML elements in there and see how they come out. Any questions? I'll be around on Monday, and yeah, good luck with it. Okay.